Hello everyone, Anthony here. So my request to be included in this conversation was ignored. After I brought it up, I was told that I'm not allowed to be in it because I'm not a developer, which whatever, that's their rules, I guess. So despite this particular conference call being dedicated to implementing ProgPoW and wanting to talk about both sides and concerns and everything, apparently it doesn't matter that I have millions of dollars at stake with ProgPoW and in Ethereum, and I've done a ton of research and presented a ton of concerns about it. It doesn't matter to them apparently because I'm not a developer. Yeah, and let me just check. Oh, Bitsby Tripping, a YouTube channel, can be in there, and he's ProgPoW, so I don't understand that. And I was looking for someone, but there was someone who I thought would be there. I don't see his name on the list, but claims that he's not a developer, even though he has like a ton of GitHub repos and coding and all that shit. So anyway, like just to name like a couple of arguments that I presented. For one, this ProgPoW audit that raised like $50,000. That all the ProgPoW proponents are like, see, it passed the audit. We can go ahead with ProgPoW and everything like that. For one, like ProgPoW audit wasn't a security audit. They didn't raise enough money to do a security audit and cut off the security audit from it, which is kind of like yesterday or the day before. Kind of funny because yesterday or the day before, there was a security bug found in ProgPoW like 2 years after it was released, finalized, and everyone's pushing for it to be implemented ASAP and all this stuff. And there's critical security bugs being found in it. But this ProgPoW audit was designed to prove two things. Number one, that it said what it said that it was going to do, which is be ASIC resistant or aid in being ASIC resistant. So it proved that. And then also it claimed, or its purpose was to prove that AMD and NVIDIA GPUs perform the same on a ProgPoW hashing algorithm network, which I don't remember looking at if it did or not, but we did see that NVIDIA performs significantly better in the capital expenses and operating costs, which wasn't tested in ProgPoW, so even if the cards perform the same, NVIDIA is still heavily favored because the cards are cheaper to get and cheaper to run. Also, people keep saying that ProgPoW isn't trying to centralize the network to only GPUs, and that it wants ASICs to be on the network and all that, but ASICs cannot compete with GPU manufacturers because GPU manufacturers have, so let's say that ASICs and AMD and NVIDIA GPUs perform the same. NVIDIA and AMD have economy of scale that puts them ahead in this competition, so they can negotiate cheaper contracts because they have more customers and are bigger operations. They can buy cheaper parts, get parts made cheaper and all that, because these companies know that there's going to be a lot of work and that NVIDIA is not going to go out of business and ditch this contract and all that. Also, NVIDIA and AMD have much better and long-running RMA processes put into practice that so if you're a miner and you have a machine go down, like a GPU go down or an ASIC go down, NVIDIA and AMD have these huge RMA processes already in practice that, like back when I was a miner, within like a week and a half, something like that, I was able to fill out the RMA, ship my card out, and receive another one back. That doesn't exist with ASICs. So that's an advantage right there for for GPUs over ASICs. And let's say that an ASIC manufacturer, what an ASIC manufacturer I believe has to do to make an ASIC for ProgPoW is to just remove the GPU bits from a GPU. There isn't really any efficiency to be gained there, only by removing some GPU bits to make them cheaper and more efficient in that sense. Is this little bit that ASICs might be cheaper or more efficient really going to make up for the economies of scale and RMA practices and processes and everything like that with NVIDIA and AMD? Also, since these, man, I hate talking about this because like I've talked about it so much, but it has to be done. So another thing with NVIDIA and AMD, ASIC manufacturers are new and small businesses. They don't have this giant amount of capital and funding put up to keep them in business. So what NVIDIA can do is just sell their GPUs cheaper and at a loss until these ASICs go out of business. So say that NVIDIA sells their cards at $50 cheaper than it costs to make them or whatever. So AMD and NVIDIA are losing money on these cards, and ASIC manufacturers can't keep up. They can't sell them for any cheaper because they don't have the capital to keep operations going. This is exactly the strategy that Microsoft used with the Xbox, I think for the first Xbox and the second generation of the Xbox. Let me just look through my list and see what else we have here, and then, because I don't really want to be talking about all this stuff right now. I have to keep my face out of my hands. Oh yeah, another thing that I have down that I wanted to mention is how everyone keeps saying like, oh, NVIDIA doesn't even care about GPU manufacturers. NVIDIA doesn't care about GPU mining. NVIDIA doesn't care. What are they going to do? NVIDIA doesn't care about mining. They're not going to try to control the network. Meanwhile, you see, since mining took off, NVIDIA's stock prices went through the roof. You see public comments from, I forget the CEO or the main guy in NVIDIA, talking about how much money they've made with mining and all that. And you see the public financials listed with NVIDIA and all that, showing percentages of mining and all that. So to say that NVIDIA doesn't care, there's tons of articles written up showing that NVIDIA does care. And it's puzzling to me how getting rid of 4 to 5 ASIC manufacturers in favor of 2 GPU manufacturers is somehow more decentralized. Doesn't make that much sense. Like, to me, it's always been clear that what's going on is that Christie wanted to make a name for herself, and she tried capitalizing on the fact that years ago ASIC manufacturers were bad. Not necessarily bad, just incompetent, I guess, in that they took pre-orders for these ASICs in a really new business that never existed before. Like ASIC mining for Bitcoin or cryptocurrency never existed before. So these new ASIC companies couldn't deliver on these GPUs and everything, and that's what this community thing that ASICs are bad, that's the community thing that Christie got on to promote herself and to promote this ProgPoW thing and make a name for herself. Anyway, that's enough of that. What I'm doing in this video that we're watching now, I'm going to listen to this conference call and pretend like I'm there and respond if I need to respond or anything. All right, I mean, this is 3 hours long, so I mean, I'm going to cut this up. I just don't really want 3 hours of footage to deal with.
And today's going to be a little different because we're not talking about a ton of subjects. It's generally going to be 2 subjects, and if we have time, James Hancock has proposed a few other ones, including stuff with the difficulty bomb, if I'm not mistaken. So the current plan is for this to be a 2-hour call. The first hour is going to be dedicated to the BLS curve signature stuff. We need to get ready for ETH 2.0. And the second hour, if it takes an hour, is going to be on collecting technical updates on ProgPoW, community dissent on ProgPoW, and next steps for ProgPoW. So the purpose of the ProgPoW discussion isn't as much to necessarily declare it's alive or it's dead. That's going to be up to the core developers per the EIP process. obviously, and we don't really have a good process for going back on something if it's accepted, because that hasn't happened very often, but we'll be getting to that later. That's generally something I guess the core developers are going to have to decide, and others after some discussion on process. But the main reasons are because there's been ProgPoW technical updates, as far as some updates based on the least authority and Bob Rao audits that are reflected in new versions of ProgPoW. There's been some, I guess the word would be exploits, that have been found in ProgPoW since then that are being addressed and need to be understood. We also want to talk about the community dissent of ProgPoW. That's going to have two people from the pro side and two people from the anti side. And then Ben DeFrancisco talking about his compromise idea. If you go to the agenda, you can see who's representing both sides. And then finally, next steps for ProgPoW. If we get to a point where we can move on and figure out the next steps from a technical or community perspective, that's another thing we're going to be doing. So that's a summary of how the ProgPoW discussion is going to go. I know.
Oops, didn't mean to press that. So I'm just going to fast forward to the ProgPoW stuff and cut out an hour.
So we're going to talk about ProgPoW now. The reason this came up was there's been a lot of community discussion around it. And again, this call, or this portion of the discussion, is to go over three main things: technical updates on ProgPoW, community approval / dissent of ProgPoW, and next steps for ProgPoW. So this is going to have some representatives from the pro ProgPoW side and the anti ProgPoW side. For the pro ProgPoW side, we have Christy Lee Minehan and Michael Carter, aka Bitsby Trippin. On the anti ProgPoW side, we have Martin Kopelman, and then Matt, are you here? Matt Luongo? Okay, maybe not able to make it, no problem. And then representing the compromise ideas, Ben DeFrancisco, which we'll go over. So to start things out, I wanted to just do really quick introductions of the 5 people I just named, or roughly 4 people I just named. So let's start with Christy, just a sentence or two about who you are, if you want to give a representation of it, or you want to say that you represent anything in particular, that stuff.
Sure. So I am Miss If of If Def Elves, one of the proposers of EIP 1057, and my work is in both software and hardware. And I am currently representing If Def Elves today.
Great. I'll be referring to Michael as BBT. So BBT, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, guys, thanks for the time. Yeah, so my name's Mike Carter. I've hosted BBT, a channel that's been dedicated on mining since 2013, so one of the earlier ones in the space. And I'll be representing, which effectively is the community that is ProgPoW on GPU mining.
Okay. Martin Kopelman. Sorry if I'm saying that last name incorrectly.
No, it's fine. I think I just one out of many voices, that have been against ProgPoW. I can't really say that I represent this community, because kind of there is no organization of that community. But other than that, I'm one of the co-founders of Gnosis and have been in the Ethereum space since almost the beginning. And recently with Gnosis, we are also starting to take over the development of Open Ethereum, but kind of that's kind of irrelevant here, maybe.
So this guy representing the anti-ProgPoW side is very passive and doesn't really want to stand up and say anything. I can already get that sense from him.
Okay, no, that's perfectly relevant in my opinion. And then B. Francisco.
Hey all, I'm Ben. I run a small software consultancy called Scopelift. We're focused on crypto. I'm a software engineer myself. I actually don't have any strong opinions on ProgPoW, which is kind of why I put forth the compromise proposal that was posted on ETH Magicians. just view it as a possible way forward for the community. There were a number of people who had proposed similar things. All I did was to kind of formalize it into a post with some specifics around it.
Okay, thank you. And even though I just introduced everyone who I invited to represent each side, that doesn't mean that everyone else in the call isn't allowed to speak or anything like that. You can definitely ask questions, have comments, things like that. Anybody else who is in the call. Oh, Matt, what's up?
Hey, sorry, it took me a minute there.
No problem. Just give a quick intro, like 1 or 2 sentences of who you are, which side you're representing, and if you have any like company representation or things like that.
Yeah, you got it. So hey guys, Matt Luongo. A little bit about me. I got involved with Bitcoin 2013, 2014. I started working on Ethereum stuff in early 2017 on a project called Key. I think what's interesting, we do a bunch of applied crypto, so while we're not doing core protocol work, I do have a fair amount of knowledge. I have an engineering background, but I'm also a CEO, so I'm not as in it as I used to be. And I'm representing kind of the maybe let's not push ProgPoW through side. I don't want to call it the anti-ProgPoW side because I feel like I can be convinced.
See again, maybe not let's do this. I don't want to call it the anti-ProgPoW side. Like, there's no one here that is completely against it. They're just like kind of iffy about it. Like, it just sucks that the sides aren't getting represented fairly publicly in any articles. No one reaches out to interview anyone.
Just not today. Yeah, good to see you guys.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. All right, so just to get started here, let's get technical.
And I don't think that's an intentional thing at all. What I think is that it's just like a ton of people in the community that there's no one to really talk to that is the anti-ProgPoW side or whatever. So it's just an effect of that. I don't think it's anything, like I said, I don't think it's anything intentional or malicious.
Updates on ProgPoW. The things I want to particularly get covered are, since the 2 audits were released, I don't believe we've had a core developer call update from IfDefElse. Not that they were asked and didn't come or anything like that, but on some of the things reflected in the audit. And then additionally, there was an exploit that was released a couple days ago, I think, by someone in the community, and there was some confusion over that, as well as some conflation between that and the things outlined in the least authority and Bob Rao audit that the Ethereum cat herders got going. So I'm guessing Christy will probably cover this, but is there anyone else who volunteers along with Christy who would have the technical capacity to comment on this? It's all you, Christy. Sorry about that.
So this is another thing, is that the stuff that Christy puts out, there's not anyone to immediately be able to review it or critique it in a technical sense to verify that the stuff she's saying is accurate and true. Like this one thing recently that she put out with a way of proving how many ASICs are on the Ethereum network by analyzing the nonces in mining. I was looking at it this morning, but I don't have like a background in knowing this technique in order to immediately pick out these flaws or anything. So it takes me days of learning about this stuff. I've seen like the nonsense research lab. I've seen this stuff with Monero, and I do see that this method may be accurate. I'm not sure, but I also have questions of it to understand better how it actually works. But there's not people that technically understand this stuff immediately there to counter anything that she says.
Sure, no problem.
Which puts like a big advantage on this stuff, because what's the saying, like a lie spreads halfway across the world before the truth gets its shoes on, or something like that.
Problem. So in the least,
So even if like someone's out there disproving this stuff, there's already like this network effect of Christie being out there pushing all this stuff as fact and whatever, and there not being any review or audit or anything on the stuff that she's saying.
authority audit, which I guess we'll go through first. There were two suggestions. One was actually to increase the number of DAG items from 256 to 512. Dataset items generated. And that we will have a pull request hopefully by the end of today. Andrea Lanfranche has been working on that piece in particular.
So what she's talking about here isn't the, and I knew this before I went on that rant, but is the security flaw that was found in ProgPoW. And so this is another technical thing that no one is verifying or anything, what she's saying and how to fix it and how serious it is or anything like that. So it's not only this 40% ASIC analysis that she did and published, but it's also this, her commenting on this security thing.
There was some work done by Powell on how that would affect light verification as well. And we have some paths to potentially optimize more on the light verification side. The other concern that least authority had was in relation to our Ketchak implementation, specifically the padding around our Ketchak. And let me just pull up the audit here. So for our Ketchak finalization, the value of in the Ketchak specification, it clearly states how you're allowed to use Ketchak. We don't add any extra padding. In no way that affects the cryptographic properties of Ketchak. So the padding in Ketchak actually just exists to make sure your different variants don't produce the same results. But we don't ever actually care about the result. So how we handle Ketchak is well within the scope of official Ketchak. We've reached out to the team that worked on Ketchak actually and proposed it, though we haven't heard back from them, just to give a look over it. And then the other suggestions on least authority were to create additional documentation, which is being worked on. And the other two, which is to establish a security framework for evaluating ASIC resistance, as well as monitoring hardware industry advances, is really is not within the scope of the proposed EIP, though I do agree that these would be very helpful suggestions for evaluating. And the other two, which is to establish a security framework for evaluating ASIC resistance, as well as monitoring hardware industry advances, is really is not within the scope of the proposed EIP, though I do agree that these would be very helpful suggestions to have. And shall I go through the recent proposed exploit by handle @kickx on Twitter?
Yeah, that'd be perfect. And also, if you can, my personal thing that I want to hear about is how that's different than the light evaluation attack that's referenced in, or not attack, I guess, but light valuation. What's it? There's a word for it, but basically that was in reference in Bob Rau's audit.
The light evaluation method.
Yep, that's it.
Yep. So for the, well, let me go through KickX's exploit first, which I think would be very helpful for the broader community. So about a day ago, or 2 days ago, an anonymous user called KickX put up a proposed repo called ProgPoW exploit. Specifically, this exploit said that if you have 64 bits in the seed function, you would be able to do a reverse guess on what your proposed nonce is going to be, and then you would be able to mangle the extra data field. You would be able to mangle the extra data field to be able to basically mangle the header and produce extra guesses. This is actually the Bitcoin. This is the exact same thing in Bitcoin where we have overt ASIC boost. It's important to understand that Kik's method is not related to the light evaluation. I'll go through that. So Kik's discovery relies on three basic assumptions. Number one, it requires you to have your own custom node implementation that differs from the current public mining infrastructure, your own pool, and quite a lot of these custom-built ASICs. Number two, it requires you to have each block's header hash modifiable, along with providing the extra data field, something, again, not provided by mining infrastructure today. And you need to be able to generate enough chat.
I'm going to check to see if this Twitter user responded to anything that she said.
Accesses within the block time of Ethereum, which is currently today between 12 and 14 seconds, depending on the network state. So this is an interesting thing that at least Authority, myself, and none of us actually thought about, given that we did not think you could mangle the extra data field in Ethereum like you can in Bitcoin. However, our proposed fix for this is actually to ensure that the seed mix right now, our proposed fix is to have the hash mix consume all 256 bits of the seed produced by that initial CapChat round.
See, the issue with this stuff, this security thing being found now, and Christie's proposed solution and all that, is that this stuff takes time to audit and for people to look at it and say, hey, this works, or hey, I thought of this last night after a week of thinking about it, or a month of thinking about it, this just came up, or whatever. So just saying like, oh, push ProgPoW ahead, we have a solution for this this exploit already. How do we trust that it's a good solution and that it's that simple to fix and everything?
While having the final CapChat consume only 64 bits of the seed. So that ensures we have 256 bits of security throughout all stages of the hash, which is...
And I mean, Christy explaining this, how her fix works and everything is great, because then that lets people audit what she's saying and what the solution is and everything like that.
Ideally, have a continuous 256 bit of security every step of the way. This should be a really minimal fix, so it shouldn't have any effect on hashing performance. Andrea Lanfranche and Gina.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing about this fix is, does this fix change anything with the way that NVIDIA and AMD miners hash the network? As in, are the cards still equal after this fix? Is another thing to take into account.
Have also been working on an alternate solution that instead would not need to increase the hash mix to 256 bits, and instead would ensure that both the first round and the last CapChat would not be static, and they would continuously require other outputs, other inputs. So we've put the proposed fix up on Gitter. We've also put, we've got a pull request on the ifdefelps GitHub repository for people to look and view. We've reached out to Solar Designer for comment. We've also reached out to the other people that have worked on ProgPoW throughout its life cycle to also give sort of a review. Now, for how the light evaluation method works, this is specifically, let me just pull up the least authority audit. It's only feasible if you're able to generate enough dataset items on a tiny ASIC connected to a bunch of RAM. And
So something else that I wanted to point out is I was looking at Christie's Twitter just a couple seconds ago when I said I was going to look at Twitter. When people come at her with criticisms of ProgPoW, like she just mentioned something about SRAM, and what triggers this is that I saw a post on her thing saying like, you're wrong, SRAM is manufactured by people or something. I don't know what it was related to, but when Christie responds to this, she takes it as like a personal attack when people criticize ProgPoW, and then responds to them defensively, and that makes it like people don't want to have these conversations with her. I certainly don't, and you have to be like, it's like walking on eggshells talking to her.
Go ahead, Martin.
Yes. So one thing that has been talked about a bit, but I don't think it has been discussed in that forum or in a similar forum, is the fact that in April, apparently the DAG is going to go over 4 gigabytes, which will cause a drop in hash power.
So this is the other thing that's like a new revelation that people are saying we don't need ProgPoW for, because what's happening, there's this DAG file that miners need to mine, and what happens is this file is stored in the GPU memory or the ASIC memory, the miner's memory, and miners, this DAG file is going to reach over 4 gigabytes soon. I don't know, I forget what he said, April or something like that. What happens is that anyone that's mining on hardware that has less than 4 gigs of memory are going to be kicked off the network. So that's all these Antminer E3 ASICs and any GPUs, AMD or NVIDIA or whatever, that have less than 4 gigs of memory on board on the card. And I don't believe, maybe there is a way to write that into system memory instead of GPU memory to keep GPUs on. You have to think about the GPU memory. Is the system memory fast enough to keep up with this? But that's not a solution for ASICs. But this whole like other revelation is like, hey, we don't need ProgPoW because these ASICs are going to be kicked off the network anyway.
Ethereum is slowly phasing out regardless, just because there's better equipment on the market. So most farms have slowly been upgrading.
So one of these arguments that Christie is making is that there's better equipment on the market, so these machines are going to be phased out anyway. I'm not aware of any new ASICs other like that supersede or take over the Antminer E3. So I don't know where she's getting that from.
Ethereum could suffer quite a sizable drop in net hash all at once, which would not be ideal for our block time.
So Christie just says that when this happens, that Ethereum would suffer a sizable network hash rate drop that wouldn't be good for block times. I think difficulty in Ethereum would recover quicker than say Bitcoin, because with Bitcoin difficulty is like every 2 weeks it gets readjusted, so there would be a 2-week period where block times are screwy and everything. I don't know what it is with Ethereum. I know blocks are every 12 to 20 seconds, somewhere around there. But how can you be concerned that Ethereum's network hash rate is going to drop because these ASICs are going to be kicked off, and then still want to push forward ProgPoW that is going to kick them off as soon as it gets implemented? Also, it cuts ProgPoW also cuts AMD GPU cards hash rate in half. So so that's a further drop in network hash rate with ProgPoW.
and it's designed for very short-term games.
So what she just commented on here is that, so she said that InnoSilicon is saying that they would put out a ASIC that instead of having 4 gigabytes, it'll have 4.5 gigabytes. And so that there'll be a new ASIC that can mine on the network. And she's saying that that there's this supposed game where they're only making this miner, they're purposely making this miner only a little bit, will only last on the network until the 4.5 gigabyte DAG limit is reached, to intentionally cut these miners off the network and make people be forced to buy more ASICs. My argument, on the other hand, would be with proof of stake coming in the future, with this imminent threat of ProgPoW coming in the future, is it financially worth the cost to make to add even more RAM onto these ASICs to make them last longer? And also you have to think about the competition in ASICs, that say that you put your money into, say that you put 6 gigs of RAM onto these ASICs so that they last 3-4 years or something like that, and then someone comes out with a higher hashing ASIC that makes your miner obsolete, then all that money that you put into this new ASIC that has 6 gigs of RAM is now a useless, unprofitable ASIC because there's a higher hashing one out there. So I don't think it's like guaranteed or a fact that these ASIC manufacturers are only increasing the RAM or the memory on these ASICs because they want to sell more ASICs. I think that there's a implementation in this or whatever. I think that there's a reason behind this, as what I stated already. So Christy says too that so increasing on this the InnoSilicon A10, which is, they said, would go offline in October. Increasing it to 4.5 gigabytes would only let it mine on the network an additional 8 months. So October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. So that brings us to June 2021. So a year and a half from now, a year from now, something like that. And ProgPoW is coming, or not ProgPoW, proof of stake is coming sometime within then.
One right now, unless you're inside of 8 months of mining time. So those are my two concerns on that front. And also the fact that no one right now, unless you're inside of China, is able to get access to InnoSilicon's updated machines, or as well as Bitmain's updated machines.
So then she brings up this, that no one outside of China is able to get access to these updated InnoSilicon machines or the new Bitmain machines. But she just previously said that that Bitmain was asking people if they would want them to build new machines. So of course they could just be saying that, and these machines can already be on the market or whatever. But it's kind of goes against what she just said. And then also this InnoSilicon A10 also doesn't exist. This 4.5 gigabyte version doesn't exist yet. So why is she saying that it does exist and that people outside of China don't have access to it?
ASICs have very, very narrow supply chains that are hit harder by world effects. They're hit harder by, we've had the recent COVID that's affected the supply chain quite heavily. Many ASIC manufacturers had to cease doing any sort of operations or business for about a month. So there's effects there that do affect it. Whereas
it's interesting that she says that, because she sees that what I was talking about before, like the economies of scale, and that ASICs don't have access to the hardware, the chips that NVIDIA does, and that's a advantage for NVIDIA and AMD and GPUs that would push ASICs off the network. She sees this. So how can you...
your GPU and your CPU companies are
Kind of forgot where I left off because the conversation kind of went off topic to talk about the differences between SRAM and DRAM and how it affects mining. So SRAM is RAM built onto the chip, I guess, and then DRAM would be the RAM built onto the GPU. And SRAM's access times are faster because it's closer to the CPU, maybe for other reasons too. But DRAM is further away from the GPU, so the access times are slower. And the person was saying that I forget who it was that was talking about it, but was saying that I don't know, something about ASICs can put SRAM on their ASICs, but then that SRAM is Christy was saying that SRAM is significantly more expensive than DRAM. I think Christy was taking the side of ASIC manufacturers in this, and in that it's not really feasible to do SRAM. Anyway, so now the conversation went back to the stag file thing, and this Bitsby tripping person is saying that the most popular card on Ethereum is the 1660 Ti or something like that. That has 6 gigabytes of RAM, so that's not threatened to be kicked off the network. I was under the impression from the stuff that I've seen that AMD is the most popular card. I can be out of the loop. I am out of the loop on what card is most popular, whatever. But all this stuff that I've seen recently has been AMD's best card. But then he's also arguing that people have already made their investments back in their old GPUs and have reinvested into new GPUs with more RAM and that hash better already. So that's also an argument. This Bitsby tripping guy and Christy are both supposed to be on the ProgPoW side. So this argument that he's making that this DAG file thing isn't going to affect GPUs seems like a reason to not have ProgPoW, because these GPUs are going to stay on the network while these ASICs are not, because they have less RAM.
Go ahead and wrap up the technical discussion. To go really quickly into this, let's first jump into just a couple minutes of Greg, you had a comment on the process, and I wanted to make sure you were heard on that since you've been vocal in the comments of the agenda on that. So if you wanted to just give your view real quick before we jump into community perspective, the Ben's compromise, the other things.
I don't think that's relevant until after we've heard from these people.
Okay.
There's when he said these people, I don't know what side he's on or what Hudson was referencing or whatever. What this Greg person, what side he's on or anything. When he said these people, I sensed kind of disdain or disliking of whoever these people are, because you're not attributing them human qualities by calling them these people. Just something that I picked up on. Like I said, I don't know what side this person is on or anything. So I'm listening to Martin Kopelman just ramble on for a couple minutes about his concerns with ProgPoW and why he's against it and stuff. And the issue that I have with this is that he's presented a ton of reasons why he's against it, and it makes it impossible. I was going to say difficult, but impossible to reply to. And this guy is someone who is anti-ProgPoW, but when you have these conversations, you have to take apart these things one by one, give people time to respond. You can't barrage them with a ton of information and stuff. That is not going to lead to a good conversation or a productive conversation. So this next thing that Hudson does, after Martin stops talking, Hudson goes into, here, I'll let you listen.
Okay. What I'm going to do here, just so that we can get through everyone speaking, is I'm going to have Matt kind of add on to that to wrap up not completely wrap up, but to wrap up this portion of the anti side to give an overview. And then I'll get to Christy and BBT on their perspective on why it should go in.
So now what I mentioned before about Martin coming with all these concerns and stuff, barraging people at once, now Hudson goes and says, all right, Matt, now you add on top of it with all of your concerns. I can tell like this is not going to be it's not going to be a good conversation. It's going to be a very frustrating one. So this Matt Longo person brings up something very that hits home to me. I have to turn up my volume for this.
Better for the chain, and as well as the split.
Well, actually, this will be overdubbed. I think this video is going to be fucking a pain in the butt to edit. But
miners, and what I guess what I don't want to see is, this will fall back to how crypto governance always falls back, which is voice or exit. Right now, we have community members who are trying to voice. We're being told that this isn't the right platform. This isn't the right platform. Everywhere we try to talk, there's not a right place. We're being denigrated and called, just like influencers, I guess. There's an assumption that none of us are technical or not, in my case, a professional engineer. So there's just this real split. And I'd like to see us step back from that and reconsider whether the social split is worth.
So he brings up that that it's very hard for people against ProgPoW to have their voices heard, and that there's nowhere to speak about it and everything, and which I mentioned, and that's why I'm making this video now. I wanted to comment on, he said people either have to voice their opinions and their thoughts or exit or leave. And that's where I came from like years ago when I made some of these videos about Ethereum with stuff that I didn't like, that I was seeing that I didn't like, was I have a significant portion, I have all of my investment future in Ethereum, which didn't happen on purpose. It happened with me investing in Litecoin years ago, and then in October of 2015, I transferred it to Ethereum, I can show people the addresses of course, I don't want to give up my addresses and everything and make them public of my Ethereum that I hold or whatever, but like to the right people, I have no problem showing that that this is true, that I do have a lot of money at stake. And I can't just get out of Ethereum because I have a significant amount of taxes that I have to pay, capital gains tax, if I just exit Ethereum. So there's a problem with that, that then once I pay these capital gains taxes, I still want my investment in cryptocurrency, so I'm going to have to look and find a new investment that is better than Ethereum so I can make back these capital gains that I lost. So that's why that's why I decided that I needed to voice my opinion, because I can't just exit from this. It doesn't make financial sense to just exit. I'm going to come out a loser if I do that. Also, if there is a network split because of this and my funds are split, is it in my best financial interest to take the side of, let's say that all the good developers and everything stay on a side that I don't agree with? Is it going to be in my best interest? Because that's one of the big things with Ethereum Classic, is that the good developers, the people that I liked, stayed with Ethereum. So it's going to be very hard for me to move to a different, and I don't want to give people ammo that like, oh, these people aren't going to leave Ethereum because they don't, like, they're just calling bluff or whatever. It's going to be a very difficult situation. But yes, like this money that I have in Ethereum, I've seen someone on the Ethereum Magicians page call me out or call out people like, why are you invested in this? What's your reason for being this position or whatever? What do you have at stake to lose? And with me, this money is, and I know that like it doesn't seem like it's ever going to happen to me in my future, but like right now, it doesn't seem like this is ever possible. This dream is ever going to come true, but I don't know what's going to happen in the future. But this money, this reason that I invested in cryptocurrency is that I had no way out of the situation that I was in, and investing was the only thing that I had that could help me accomplish this dream, which is having a wife and kids and being able to have a family. And with what I have invested in Ethereum, I'm able to just completely take off from cryptocurrency and working and everything and focus 100% on my kids, being there for their school projects, being there when they have arguments with other kids in school, advising them, guiding them, keeping them away from harm and picking the wrong people to hang out with and all this stuff. Like I can be 100% present for my kids, and that's what I have at stake with this money and everything. So Matt just mentioned, I just got in touch with him on Twitter. He just mentioned that there are at least 2 teams that he's aware of that will develop on the side that is a non-ProgPoW chain. So just asked him if he can talk about who those teams are publicly so I can evaluate them.
ASIC that I wanted to strengthen. It hashes an algorithm to help ensure that the original goals stated in the yellow paper are met.
So this is one thing that I don't really agree with, is that people are saying that like the yellow paper says that Ethereum is ASIC resistant, therefore we need to maintain its ASIC resistance. Like times changed. Like a long time ago we had slaves and that's changed. There, if anyone made the argument that like that the United States was formed under, like, I don't know if this is true or not, but if anyone makes the argument, oh, the United States was formed under the basis of having slaves, therefore we should keep slaves, that's not a very good argument because times change, you know. So there's another point that I made on Reddit too. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to say in the same vein is that the ProgPoW like proponents say that like, oh, 2 years ago miners voted and it was like a 100% miners, 100% of miners are in favor of ProgPoW, and that's the same thing, that you can't take a vote from 2 years ago and say like, hey, this vote from 2 years ago says that we should do this, therefore we should. That's not an argument, because times change, environments change, perceptions change, things like that. There's a lot of stuff that came out against ProgPoW and continually does, because there's this DAG file and this security exploit that just came out recently that I'm sure is going to change the vote if there was a vote today in the same way.
It does not gateway, it doesn't block miners coming into the ecosystem and new participants coming in and earning Ether.
So Christie's saying that she wants a landscape where new participants, new miners can come in, new people can come in to start mining Ethereum and start earning Ether. I don't think that's, I think that's a function of the hash rate that is preventing that it no longer becomes feasible, because it takes way too much capital expenses to buy all the hardware just to be able to find a block and get a block reward. I don't think that's really a function of the hash algorithm, and I think it's really dangerous that you want to, or I think it's dangerous to change the hash algorithm every time that new miners can't come in so that you can now bring in new miners. Because then what happens to all the old miners? That's going to be a problem for them. Like that's not going to be fair to them, you know? So there's been like a lot of talk also in this conversation. We're like an hour into it already. Still have another hour to go. There's been like talk in this conversation, like with educating and talking to the people to convince them and everything, or addressing their concerns. And I know I have a lot of concerns, and I would want to reach out to Christy and speak about my concerns and whatever, and have an actual conversation about it. I think that would be very helpful to the community, because I'm someone who is very vocal and anti-ProgPoW and have concerns, and at the very least to show the community that these both sides can have civil discussions with each other, and whatever is going to be helpful too, for as far as bringing the community together, and to see that two sides can get along and everything. Which I hate that, like, I don't know if Christy will agree to it or whatever, because fairly sure she doesn't like me. But when I have in the past tried to talk to people who are on the opposing side, I'm met with like, we don't talk to terrorists, no negotiating with terrorists. And that just like completely shuts down the conversation that I'm trying to have to talk about this stuff, like to try to get my concerns addressed and all that. And it's very hard to do that. So this one guy, Ben G. Francisco, I think his name was, or whatever, has like wrote up this proposal that's not just his proposal, like he's just the one who formalized it and wrote down or whatever. I think it's just way too much to take on, because now people are considering pro-ProgPoW, anti-ProgPoW, compromise. It's a lot more to think about, and that's why I'm kind of turned off by even listening to this. Like, everyone's already overloaded. I'm overloaded by thinking about all this stuff, and just to have something else to propose to think about I don't think is very helpful right now. So basically, this proposal, this compromise proposal, is just that it'll be automatically programmed into the mining clients and the Ethereum clients that when a certain condition is met, then ProgPoW would automatically switch over. Basically, what I think is that this is being used as like a warning, like, hey, if you ASIC manufacturers take over the network, this ProgPoW thing is going to automatically go into effect, so you might as well not even try. But that's the same thing here, to where proof of stake and ProgPoW are both looming over ASIC manufacturers' heads. And what I said about Silicon not making an ASIC more than 4.5 gigabytes, I think is one of the reasons that they're doing that. So I don't see why, if there is a problem, if there is a problem that happens in the future, especially now that we have apparently a way by analyzing the nonces to see how many ASICs are on the network, or at least to see how many E3 miners are on the network, that if there is a problem in the future where ASIC is doing a 51% attack or doing anything malicious, that we can just fork, because that's what happened with the ASIC boost thing, is that the network just forked and was like, fuck you. Like, everyone agreed, like, fuck you, you're taking advantage of an exploit to make more Bitcoins or whatever, so we're just gonna fork. I don't see why forking after the sign of an issue is a problem. So right here, this Greg person that I commented on before, who he classified someone as these people, and I didn't know who he was classifying to. It shows now who he's talking about, and he's talking about the anti-ProgPoW people that he has disdain for. And here.
Do we have a solid engineering plan?
What?
So what happened is that Martin is saying that proof of stake is a deterrent for ASICs, because proof of stake is going to come in the future, whatever. And then Greg comments back, do we have a solid plan for that? So he's taking the side of that that's not an excuse to not be pro ProgPoW or to not implement ProgPoW. Yeah, so we see what side he's on now. I'll just have you guys listen.
1 or 1.5 years, or at least the transition or the decrease of mining rewards starts towards proof of stake, then I think that's a much more effective way to mitigate this ASIC dominance.
Do we have a solid engineering plan for that transition?
Bit early
Yeah,
for
so
that,
that's-
I'd say.
That's where time should be spent on. And
It could be 2 years, it could be 4 years, we don't know.
well, that's why we should spend time on that one and not on ProgPoW.
Actually, the same could be said about implementing ProgPoW as an option for the mainnet, because the proposal's weakest point is that it already assumes that all the developers.
I really wish this chat box in the software that they're using didn't exist, because there's people like having a conversation in the chat box, and then there's people having a conversation in the or maybe not a full-blown conversation in the chat box, but bringing up points in the chat box, and then people talking in the chat box. Like, I think it would be better just like if you have something to say and you can't say right now, take a note and then bring it up in the like when you have time, or when there's time to bring up that point, because this is getting like kind of, I mean, it brings the potential for getting this stuff off track. I'm not saying that the conversation is off track right now, but it definitely brings the potential to it. What I do get from this though is at least like seeing Christy speak and whatever in this conversation is that it's different than she's different than what you see when she's typing and everything, that when you talk to her face to face, that she's actually receptive of comments and criticism and stuff, and that she is able to be spoken to, or spoken with, I mean, not spoken to. I also do want to point out, like, when I listened to this conversation, or when I commented early in this conversation saying that these people didn't seem invested in being anti-ProgPoW, this Martin Kopelman is bringing up like some good anti-ProgPoW arguments, so it's not like he's just being totally passive or anything like that. Oh man, this Amin guy, just with only listen to these accusations, and I'm not, like, technically he's taking the side that I'm on, but these accusations, you can't do that. You can't do that when you're trying to have a productive conversation. You can't be accusing people of
the core dev political committee to get up people and saying that I've stated the same thing 3 times.
For ETH-2.0 with it.
What was that comment, I mean?
Said the same thing 3 times. I'd just like to jump in here, state some opinions, some of which just seem so obvious, it's like kind of gut-wrenching that I even have to. First of all, ProgPoW people, it's a bunch of profit-seeking miners lobbying the core dev political committee to get what they want, right? Full stop, that's what this is. Second thing, as a proof-of-stake maximalist,
I mean, like, in this conversation, it's very clear to me that people are trying to have a conversation about it and aren't trying to manipulate anyone or whatever. So it's not 100%. Like, I agree. Like, there's some aspects to that, but not any of these aspects are existing in this conversation.
very excited by the prospect of miners becoming stakers. But I have absolutely no sympathy for miners of the GPU or ASIC variety. In the long term, the intention has always been to show them the door. I don't really see why they feel entitled to a say in governance. The core devs that have
I don't know what this, like, this yelling stuff, it can't, it's not conducive to a civil conversation at all. But I don't even know what triggered this. Like, someone went to interrupt him, and instead of...
Because I mean, there has been a lot of talk about what other clients are like supposed to do.
Like, I don't know. I just think of, like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, you think of like, I think of like just a kid witnessing two parents fighting. Like you just see like, you see a war. You don't see like a civil discussion of people trying to come to a solution. You see a war. And as someone on the outside, as like a helpless person or someone that doesn't want a war, it's very, very frightening. It's upsetting to me that it's the anti-ProgPoW people that are getting aggressive here. That's not helpful to not getting ProgPoW passed, but it's like, it's not a good way to have conversations. So I was looking like with this Amin guy saying that stuff, and then Christy in the comments saying like, this stuff sucks, like with these personal attacks and everything. And I'm like, yeah, I know, Christy, like we can't do that to have conversation. And I'm like in the middle of writing like my tweet to Christy asking her to have a conversation or whatever. And then like I remember, and I'm like, yeah, this is fine. But then like I remember looking at this thing of Christy accusing me of spreading misinformation and all this stuff, like intentionally spreading misinformation. So I'm like, I don't even know if I want to do this call anymore, because it shows that she doesn't stick to these things. Like you're kind of being a hypocrite. Like, you can't accuse someone of having personal attacks against you in a conversation and then give personal attacks to other people in conversation, because that makes me not want to talk to her anymore. And it's sad that I had to have this like flashback come about, because this is a conversation that I wanted to have with her, and now I'm not particularly sure if this is a feasible thing. And like when you talk about like, oh, we should have conversations to address people's concerns and stuff, and now I'm not so willing to have a conversation because I am reminded of this stuff. So it's harder to convince people. It's gonna be harder to convince me to change my mind and to even talk about my concerns because of seeing this stuff.